I just need to give you a short little view of how everything came to be. So Fannie Mae was created actually as part of the Great Depression. So this it was created in 1938. Now I think this is important. And what was going on during that time? The banks stopped lending and the homeownership collapsed. Okay, so this is really important. And what it did is it was buying mortgages from banks to provide liquidity back to banks so that they would, again, make loans. And that ran pretty well up until about 1968. And then they privatized, oddly enough. So Fannie Mae privatized. And, I know this is going back, this is important. Then what happened in 1970, they became too powerful. And so in comes Freddie Mac, which was actually enacted by Congress. And that's when they started trading publicly, and it's called the GSE, or government-sponsored entities. And now you can buy mortgage-backed securities, okay? And so this all of a sudden went cruising along. And then in the great financial crisis of 2008, things went sideways. Both these things were about ready to collapse, and the government took them over, and they put them in what's called conservatorship. This is really important because it's not nationalization, but it's conservatorship, which means that it was helping them not collapse. Now what's happened is they both have basically $100 billion sitting on their balance sheets of cash. And Trump's like, we need to use your cash to be able to buy down these rates. So essentially, he's just stepping right over the Fed. So this is a really important piece. And it's been in conservatorship since 2008. All Trump did was really just look at the balance sheet of these two entities that the government has control of right now. And he's going to be buying down these rates.
Well, what I think is interesting about it is a couple of things. One is Trump is basically saying he does not need the Fed to lower the rates,
right?
Because the reason that quantitative easing is when the Fed starts buying these mortgage-backed securities. He's having trouble working with the Fed in order to do anything like that. So he's just like, well, how about instead of the Fed buying them, we just buy them straight through the companies that have the money that, promote the mortgages. And then in turn, it is good for Fannie and Freddie because if it stimulates the housing market and it creates refinances, that's actually good for them. So they're kind of investing in their own business.
Right. And so what are the pros? What are the cons? I think that's really important. This is a housing policy adjustment, not a monetary policy adjustment. That's a big difference. And so the Fed stays independent, as independent as, Trump likes to make us believe it is, even though he's appointing obviously the next governor. That's number one. The administration actually can drive down lower rates. Right. Yep. And that's really, really important because this is why I remember a couple of weeks ago, I said, there's too much focus on the Fed because it really doesn't move. And we talked about the 10-year and all that kind of stuff. But it also creates a stimulus, but not from the Fed's books. So this is cash that's sitting in a, government entity at the moment that's managed by the Housing Finance Agency. And he's basically saying buy down these, buy these mortgage-backed securities. And so this is a housing policy, not a monetary policy. And the result is going to be a increase in housing demand.
So, and people always ask, can Trump do that, right? So this is kind of interesting too. So like with the Fed chair, how Trump gets to elect the Fed chair, the Federal Housing Finance Agency, Trump also is able to elect that position as well. So
because of that 2008 issue.
But it's kind of the same, it's like a one-trick pony, right? Like what he was trying to do with the Fed and what he's going to do is get his guy in there and then hopefully be able to influence the Fed. But to your guys' point, there's more than just one person that makes those decisions. There's a whole committee. Where over here in Fannie and Freddie, he has a little bit more pool with that person to do what he wants them to do.
It essentially is governed by the administration.
Yeah. Right
now, Fannie and Freddie, because of what happened in 2008, it stayed in what they call conservatorship since 2008, and it's still that way today. So that's an important piece. This is something that the government can actually has power over. It literally, if you want to take a look at it, it was essentially those two entities were going to collapse, which would have been horrible. In 2008 was a mess, as you guys know. We went through this. But now that they're sitting on a couple $100 billion, and he's like, we're going to take the money because, by the way, they're not supposed to be profitable. Remember, they're supposed to be handling housing, and making sure that it's stable, making sure that it's affordable, all of those things. So this is a huge tool that has not been used like this.
Plus, it does help them. Like I said, it reinvests into things that are going to re-stimulate the market, which is what's good for them. So it's kind of a win-win for them.
Why would Fannie and Freddie need $200 billion on their balance sheet? Seriously, why would they need that? Maybe for other rainy day stuff, I get it, but in this particular case, this does completely bypass the Fed. One of the things I was actually looking at was, okay, now what's the Fed's move, right? Like, what's the Fed really going to do at this point? And I think they're gonna, which they always do, they wait and see what happens, we all should do. And then they're going to react accordingly. And the one thing that keeps popping up as a result of this is price appreciation, right?
Well, let's look at, instead of saying what it is, let's look at the Canadian market, because the Canadian market has already done this. So they have already had their housing committee or, their lender buy
It's
those
called the
securities.
Canadian Mortgage Housing Corporation. It's essentially the same thing.
Yep.
The CMHC.
So they did this. They've done this like over a decade ago. So they've had this for a long time. And basically what happened is mortgage rates went down. They were down lower than they should be, which is exactly what would happen if Trump has Fannie and Freddie do this now. And it avoided a sharp housing crash at the time. And that is what, we're kind of looking at too, right? We're on this teetering point where the housing market is froze. Sellers aren't motivated, so I wouldn't say we're on the edge of a crash, but we are on the edge, we're frozen. So we need something to move it one way or the other. So obviously, just like in Canada, this would move us away from a crash and accelerate buyers. But the downfall of what it did in Canada is home prices exploded because of this. So your average cost of a home in Canada is in the 7s, where in the United States, it's in the 4s.
But here's the irony around that. So as you guys know, I grew up on the border of Canada, basically north of Seattle. And we used to drive there as kids. And so I've been going there for years. And actually we're making a trip there this year if they let us in.